He almost didn't stop. Webb Holcomb, 48 years old, had driven the road between Redstone and the timber camp 100 times, enough to know its moods in every season, enough to know what belonged there and what didn't. In a November blizzard, nothing belonged there. The road was white and narrowing by the minute, and Webb had 2 miles left between himself and the forge, and no particular reason to let anything slow him down. He almost didn't stop. The shape at the edge of the road registered wrong before he understood why. Too upright for a fallen branch. Too still for an animal. He pulled Juniper to a halt and squinted through the driving snow. A woman. 26 years old, though he wouldn't know that until later. She was standing beside a handcart that listed badly to one side, its left wheel cracked clean through. She had her back to the wind and her arms folded across her chest. Not in anger, in the specific posture of a person who has been cold for a long time and has accepted it as the current condition of existing. A bundle was strapped to her front in a length of wool cloth, pressed against her body. Webb set the brake. "Ma'am," he called down. She looked up. Her face was pale, and her eyes were the kind of gray that does its thinking before it speaks. She was assessing him, the wagon, the horse, the man on the bench, with the careful efficiency of someone who had learned that strangers on roads came in categories and that the categories mattered. "The wheel's broken," she said, not asking for help. Stating a fact as though she were reporting the weather. "I can see that. I need to get to Redstone. That's where I'm headed." She looked at the handcart, then at him, then at the snow, which was accelerating. "If you have a piece of iron bar on that wagon," she said, "I can splint the wheel myself. Just show me how." He stared at her. She was 26 years old and standing in a blizzard with a baby strapped to her chest, and she was asking him to teach her to repair a wheel. "I don't have iron bar," he said, "but I have a forge." She held his gaze. Whatever calculation she was running took less than 10 seconds. "All right," she said. He helped her up to the bench. She accepted the hand but did the climbing herself, and she settled the bundle in her lap and he clicked at Juniper, and they moved south toward Redstone through the white. Her name was Tess Kimball. She told him that much on the ride, and that the baby was 5 months old and his name was Finn, and that she had been staying with the Alderton family 2 miles north of town since October. She did not tell him why she needed to get to the post office, and he did not ask. Finn slept through the entire ride, which Tess seemed to find both a relief and a mild personal affront, as though the baby's composure was a commentary on her own. "He never cries when he should," she said, looking down at the sleeping face. "That's a problem? It means he saves it for when I've just gotten to sleep." Webb almost smiled. He drove. The Holcomb forge and house sat together at the south end of Redstone's main street. The forge slightly ahead, the house behind it, connected by a covered walkway that Webb had built the second winter after Francis died, when he understood that he was going to need a way to move between the two without going outside in February. He was a practical man. Practicality was what he'd had in those years, and he'd used it. He showed Tess into the house, built the fire from its coals, and went to take care of Juniper. When he came back in, she had found the kitchen on her own, had Finn on a blanket on the floor, and was looking at the shelf above the fireplace with the quiet, deliberate attention she seemed to bring to everything she examined. The shelf held 2 things: a photograph of Francis, taken in Denver in the summer of '81, 2 years before she died, and beside it, a small iron hammer, 8 inches long, with a handle of turned walnut. A child's hammer, sized for small hands, made for a specific purpose that had never arrived. Tess did not ask about it. Webb heated soup, remnants of yesterday's beef and root vegetables, and cut bread, And they ate at the kitchen table while Finn sat on Tess's knee and looked at Webb with the focused, unblinking attention of a 5-month-old who has decided that a new face requires extended study. "He's looking at you," Tess said. "I noticed. It means he's decided you're interesting." She watched the baby. He doesn't look at walls. Webb looked at Finn. The baby had dark hair and eyes still working their way toward their final color, but the expression was entirely his mother's. The expression that took things in and filed them before deciding what to do with them. "What's his name again?" Webb said. "Finn." He nodded. He went back to his soup. Finn, apparently satisfied with his assessment, dropped his head against his mother's arm and closed his eyes. Outside, the blizzard continued. Inside, the fire continued. Webb Holcomb, 48 years old, ate supper across from a woman he did not know and her 5-month-old son, and did not ask why they had been standing on a mountain road in a November storm. He would wait until she was ready to tell him, or until she left, and either way he would not require the explanation in exchange for the warmth. The fever came at 2 in the morning. Webb had been asleep in the chair by the fire. He'd given Tess the bedroom, which she'd accepted without argument or ceremony, and that told him something, when he heard soft, deliberate footsteps, the kind that try not to wake anyone. He was already up when she appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Fever," she said quietly. Her voice was controlled, but her eyes were doing the thing he'd noticed at the road, managing something underneath. "Finn, I need hot water and cool cloths." He took the pot from her hands before she finished reaching for it. He stirred the coals alive and added wood and had the water heating before she'd said another word. "How high?" he said. "High enough to concern me, not high enough for the worst fear." "Go back to him," Webb said. "I'll bring it." She went. He sat in the doorway of the bedroom, not in the room, in the doorway where she hadn't asked him to be and hadn't asked him to leave, and watched her work. The cool cloths, the nursing, the quiet, continuous voice that wasn't quite words, just the sound of a person who means safety. Finn was awake and unhappy and hot, and he looked at his mother with the expression of a baby who has assigned her responsibility for the state of the world and is waiting for her to fix it. Something moved through Webb's chest at 3 in the morning, watching a 26-year-old woman manage her fear by placing it somewhere she'd deal with later. He recognized the practice. He had used it himself in this same house 11 years ago. He managed what he could by keeping the lamp trimmed and the fire built. At 4, Finn slept, the deep, collapsed sleep of a body that has finished fighting. Tess straightened and turned and found Webb still in the doorway. "He's sleeping," she said. "I can see that." "You can go." Webb looked at Finn, then at Tess, then at the small iron hammer visible on the shelf through the open door of the main room. "I'm fine in the chair," he said. She looked at him. This man, 48 years old, sitting in a doorway at 4 in the morning in his own house, keeping watch over a stranger's sick child. She looked at the hammer on the shelf, and she understood something, the way grief sometimes recognizes the shape of itself in another person. She did not say it. "Thank you," she said, "for not driving past." He looked at the window, where the blizzard had quieted to a steady fall. "My father told me to stop for people on the road," he said. "It's not a virtue, it's a practice." "Some practices become virtues," she said. He looked at the baby. "Is he going to be all right?" "Yes." Her voice was certain in a way that had nothing to do with confidence, and everything to do with having decided that it had to be true. He came into the world in a hurry, and he's been in a hurry ever since. She lay down beside Finn, close enough to feel when the fever shifted. The lamp was low, the fire was quiet. In the room, a mother and her son. In the doorway, a man who had learned, slowly, across 11 years, that staying was sometimes the only honest thing left to do. The fever broke before dawn. She did not leave in the morning. Finn was not ready to travel, fragile in the way of babies whose systems have been taxed, needing warmth and stillness. Tess did not offer this as an explanation. She simply stayed, and Webb did not tell her to go. The days found their shape without discussion, the way two practical people in the same space naturally divide the work. Webb ran the forge. Tess ran the house. She cleaned with the thoroughness of a woman who understands that a house kept by a man alone for 5 years has entire corners it has stopped noticing. She found good dishes in the back of the cabinet. She reorganized the kitchen with the logic of someone who has been managing a household since before she was old enough to call it that. On the second morning, she moved the flour. Webb came in from the forge at midday, opened the pantry, and stood in front of it for a moment. "Where's the flour?" he said. "Where it won't damp," she said. Without looking up from the accounts she'd found in his desk drawer, and was reading with the expression of a woman who has encountered something that requires immediate attention. It was sitting next to the water bucket. He found the flour. He said nothing. But 3 days later, when Rory Langley from the hardware store came by to drop off an order and Webb directed him to the pantry for a jar of preserves, Webb went to the right shelf on the first attempt and stood there for a moment after, aware of what that awareness meant. The evenings were when something shifted. Daytime had its work. Webb outside, Tess inside, the forge running with the efficiency of two practical people who communicated through information left behind. A harness oiled on the porch, a missing button replaced without comment. Firewood restacked closer to the door. But evenings brought them both to the fire. On the fourth evening, Tess said without looking up from the mending, "Why did you name the horse Juniper?" Webb looked up from his book. "She came to me in June. I'm not complicated about names." "Finn came to me in June, too," she said. She looked at the sleeping baby on his blanket. "I almost named him June, just to see what would happen." "What stopped you?" "He looked at me in the first minute," she said, "and I thought, this is not a June. This is someone who is going to have very specific opinions about everything." Webb looked at Finn on his blanket, who was, even in sleep, gripping a corner of it with the focused intention of a person conducting important business. "He does have opinions," Webb said. "About everything," Tess said. "The blanket has been a major concern for 2 weeks." He watched the baby for a moment. "He's trying to figure out who he is," Webb said. "The blanket is just where he started." She looked at the mending. Something passed between them in the firelight that neither of them named. "Now, before I go on, I want to stop and speak to you directly for a moment. Most of you listening right now are somewhere in the middle of something. Maybe you're driving. Maybe you're folding laundry or sitting somewhere quiet, letting this story keep you company on a long evening. That's exactly what Prairie Hearts is here for. If Webb and Tess are keeping you company right now, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like. It means more than you know, truly. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? I read every single one. Now, Tess has been carrying something for 5 months, and she has been carrying it alone long enough. She told him on the 6th evening. Webb had seen her watching the road from the kitchen window twice that day. Had seen her go still when a rider passed the south end of Main Street. Had noticed the sealed letter in her coat pocket that she pulled back quickly, the particular motion of someone protecting something they aren't ready to share. He had waited. With Finn asleep in the back room, she told him. She told him about Patrick, 2 years married. A homestead claim on 40 acres east of town with good water rights. The kind of water rights a man could build a future on, or sell for enough to start over somewhere else. Patrick had worked the Copperfield mine because the land needed 1 more season before it could carry them. He had gone down the number 3 shaft on a Tuesday in July and had not come back up. The collapse had taken 4 men. Finn was 3 weeks old. Patrick's brother, Declan Kimball, 39 years old, 3 times Patrick's size in every sense that mattered to the law, had arrived at the funeral with a document he'd had drawn up in Pueblo, a petition to the county court. Tess Kimball was an unsuitable custodian, a 26-year-old woman with no local family, no connections in Colorado, a newborn, and a contested property claim. The petition named insufficient income. It named instability. It named, between every line, the fact that those 40 acres had the best water access in the valley, and that Declan Kimball had been trying to acquire them for 6 years before Patrick filed on them. He had paid for the funeral arrangements when Tess didn't have the cash in the first week of grief. He had used the owing of it as a door into her life that she had not agreed to open. The petition had not yet been heard, but Declan had connections in Pueblo, and the county clerk in her township had known the Kimball family for 15 years, and Tess had not waited to learn how the arithmetic came out. She had sold what she could, taken Finn, and moved. That was October. That was why she was in Redstone. That was why she needed the post office. She was waiting for a letter from the mine's former foreman, a man named Cyrus Vore, who had witnessed Patrick's original homestead filing and had told her, quietly, that he had documents that made Declan's petition look like what it was. Webb was quiet through all of it, in the way he was quiet when he was taking something seriously. When she finished, she looked at her hands on the table. "Patrick left that land to Finn and me," she said. "Declan paid for a coffin. He did not buy my son with it." She looked up at Webb. "I know that the Pueblo County clerk may not agree," she said. Webb held her gaze. "A petition not yet heard in Pueblo County has no authority in this jurisdiction," he said. "This is a different court entirely. Judge Elmore Carr has been on the bench in this county for 12 years. I've known him for 16. He paused. "Does Declan know which direction you went?" "Not precisely." She thought about the days. "He knows I don't have people north. He'll search south first." "How far behind you?" 4 days, maybe 3 now. Webb nodded slowly. He had the expression of a man doing arithmetic with more variables than he'd started with, and arriving, quietly, at a number that required a decision. "A petition unheard is not an order," he said. "Let me go to Judge Carr tomorrow morning, before Declan does." Tess looked at her hands. She thought about 5 months of moving alone, because needing people was a transaction with unpredictable terms. She thought about a man who had turned back in a blizzard, who had sat in a doorway until the fever broke without requiring a single thing from her in return. She looked at the small iron hammer on the shelf in the main room and thought about what it meant that it was still there, 11 years on, still hanging. "Go," she said. He went. Judge Elmore Carr received Webb the next morning, in the manner of a man who takes things seriously, and doesn't enjoy being made to before breakfast. Webb told it plainly: the marriage, the mine collapse, the 3-week-old baby, Declan's petition in Pueblo, not yet heard, not yet in order, the property, the funeral debt used as leverage. Carr listened. He asked 2 questions. Then he said, "Bring her to me this afternoon. I want her account before Kimball presents himself. A Pueblo petition with no hearing on record carries no weight in my court unless I choose to extend it that courtesy. On the basis of what you're describing, I don't see grounds for courtesy." He looked at Webb over his glasses. "Bring her at 2. He brought her at 2. Tess Kimball, 26 years old, sat across from the county judge and told her own account. She told it cleanly, without embellishment, the way a person tells something they have been carrying and have finally found the right place to set down. Carr listened. He asked 3 questions. Then he said, "Mrs. Kimball, a petition filed in Pueblo County with no hearing completed is not enforceable in this jurisdiction. I will not act on it without a formal proceeding in this court. If Mr. Kimball presents himself here, I will hear him, and I will hear you equally and in the same room. Your son's custody and your property rights remain as they stand." He paused. "I would need considerably more than a funeral bill to find otherwise." They drove back to the forge. Declan arrived 2 days later. He came with 2 men, the configuration of someone who wants to appear to have authority rather than simply possessing it. Webb was at the forge when the wagon came up the street. Tess was on the porch. She had not hidden. He had not asked her to. Declan Kimball, 39 years old and broad across the shoulders, climbed down and looked at Webb, and then at Tess on the porch, and then back at Webb. "That's my brother's wife," he said, "and my brother's boy. I have a legal document." "I know about the document," Webb said. "Judge Carr knows about the document." Declan's jaw tightened. He looked at Tess. She came down the porch steps. She stood in the street with Finn on her hip. She was 26 years old, and she had been cold and afraid and alone for 5 months, and she had filed all of that away for later, and her voice when she spoke was entirely level. "You paid for Patrick's funeral," she said. "I am grateful. You did not buy my son with it." She held his gaze. "Patrick filed that homestead in both our names. If you have a legal claim to it, bring it to Judge Carr at a proper hearing. That is the process. It is the only process I will participate in." One of Declan's men was studying his boots. The other was looking at the road behind them. They had agreed to accompany a document, and the document had encountered a woman who understood exactly what it was and what it was not. Webb stepped forward. He stood beside Tess, not in front of her, beside her. "Judge Carr's office is above the hardware store," Webb said. "He's available Monday if you want to file properly." Declan looked at Tess one more time. He looked at whatever he had come to take and the specific impossibility of taking it from a woman who was standing in a street, naming the law back to him with the accuracy of someone who'd had nothing to do for 5 months, but learn it. He got back in the wagon. The street went quiet. Even Finn, who had been conducting his usual assessment of the new arrivals, paused. Webb stood beside Tess and looked at the road where the wagon had gone. "You didn't need me," he said. "No," she said, "but I was glad you were there." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Ask me," she said. He turned. "Would you still ask me to stay," she said, "if Declan weren't coming?" He held her gaze for a long moment. The forge was behind them, still warm from the morning's work. The house was behind that. The Colorado November was cold and enormous around them. "Yes," he said, "the trouble only made me say it sooner." She looked at the street, at the forge, at the mountains going white above the valley. "Ask me properly," she said. He took off his hat. He held it in both hands. "Tess," he said, "will you stay?" She looked at him with the gray eyes that had been assessing things since before he helped her up to the wagon bench in the blizzard. "Yes," she said, the way she said everything that mattered, simply without decoration, as though the word was sufficient and she trusted him to know it. That evening after supper, with Finn asleep in the back room and the forge cooling and the Colorado night pressing against the windows, he told her about Frances. 14 years together. The pregnancy in the spring of '82. The particular happiness of that summer, the kind that belongs to 2 people who have built something together and are about to add to it. The night in autumn when the baby came too early. The hours afterward. Frances going quiet before morning. He told it without looking for her reaction. She received it the way she received most things, with attention and without performance. "The hammer," she said finally. "Not a question." He looked at the shelf. "I made it the summer before, to give to him when he was old enough to hold it." He paused. "I kept it because taking it down felt like deciding something I hadn't decided yet." She was quiet for a moment. "How long?" she asked. "Until you could get up in the morning." "The first year because the work required it," he said. The second year because it was what you did. He stopped. The third year I started waking up earlier. 4 in the morning. Then 3, earlier every week. Why? I don't know, he said. He looked at the window. It felt like something was about to happen that he didn't want to miss. She looked at him across the table. She thought about a man who had been waking earlier and earlier without understanding why, who had driven that road 100 times and on the 101st had almost not stopped, had almost kept going and had not. She stood up. She went to the shelf. She took down the small iron hammer, 8 inches long, handle of turned walnut, and brought it back to the table and set it between them. Finn's going to want to know where things come from, she said, when he's old enough. Webb looked at the hammer, then at her. He should know this one was made for him, she said. Not for the boy who didn't get to come home, for Finn. Because this is where he ended up, and that is the right use of a thing made with care. Webb was very still. Then he picked up the hammer and held it in both hands for a moment. He set it back on the table between them. All right, he said. The fire was warm, and outside the Colorado November was cold and enormous, and the house was exactly the right size, and the small iron hammer was on the table between them, no longer only the weight of what had been lost, but the shape of what was coming. That was enough for that night. It was enough. Declan Kimball presented himself to Judge Carr on Monday, as Webb had said he could. Carr received him and told him that the Pueblo petition, unheard and unfiled in this jurisdiction, carried no authority in his court, and that if Declan wished to pursue a property or custody claim, he was welcome to retain a Colorado attorney and proceed through proper channels, which would take a minimum of 8 months, and which Carr anticipated he would not win on account of the fact that a funeral bill was not a legal instrument. Declan left Redstone on Wednesday. In December, a letter arrived from Cyrus Vore, the mine's former foreman. Webb watched Tess's face as she read it at the kitchen table. Patrick's original homestead filing named Tess and Finn as sole beneficiaries, witnessed by 2 men whose signed statements were enclosed. Declan's petition had been built on grounds that did not hold. Vore had been waiting, he wrote, for a safe address to send it to. Tess folded the letter. She looked at Webb. He kept records, she said. Honest people usually do, Webb said. She put it in the drawer where she kept Finn's documents. Then she made coffee, and they talked about the 40 acres, whether to sell it or hold it, until Finn was old enough to have an opinion about land. It's his, Tess said. Then he should decide, Webb said. The winter passed in the way of Colorado winters, demanding and beautiful in roughly equal measure, with enough cold to close the world down to the immediate, and enough quiet to make the immediate matter more. There was an evening in January when they disagreed, properly and thoroughly, about the forge accounts, specifically whether Webb had been overcharged by the iron supplier for the 2nd consecutive month, or whether the discrepancy was in the recording. It was a genuine disagreement between 2 people who both believed they were correct. She was right. He said so without difficulty. She noted that he said so without difficulty and filed it as its own kind of information. There was an afternoon in February when May Hollis from the dry goods store came by and spent 2 hours in the kitchen with Tess, and told her husband that evening that she had confirmed what she'd suspected since November, and that the spring would bring something worth celebrating on the south end of Main Street. Her husband said that was their business, not hers. She said that was still a very interesting perspective. There was a Sunday in March when Webb came in from checking the fence line to find Tess at the kitchen table helping Finn practice sitting up. Finn was 8 months old and had developed firm opinions about gravity, which he was working through one fall at a time with the philosophical patience of a person who has decided the world is worth the effort. Webb stood in the doorway and watched them and thought about the small iron hammer with its new nail on the shelf, and a house that had been maintained without being inhabited for 5 years, and the specific difference between the two. He thought, this is what I was waking up early for, not the trouble that made me say it sooner. This, the ordinary Sunday morning of it. They married in April in the Redstone Church on a Saturday, with the Colorado Spring outside, mud season giving way to first grass, the mountains still white above the new green. Judge Elmore Carr sat in the second row. He considered himself personally responsible for the outcome and saw no reason not be present for it. May Hollis was in the third row. She had arrived before the candles were lit, and she had no apologies for that. Webb wore his good coat, the one Francis had always liked, because he understood that beginning something new did not require setting aside what had come before. It required carrying it forward with honesty. Tess wore a dress she'd made herself from gray wool, the same color she'd been wearing on the road. It seemed right to begin with the color she'd arrived in. Finn was 8 months old, and had recently discovered that pulling himself to standing against any available surface was the most urgent project in the world. He pulled himself up on the front pew during the ceremony, looked at the congregation with the satisfied gravity of someone who has accomplished something significant, and sat down deliberately. The congregation witnessed this. Several of them laughed, which Finn received as appropriate recognition. After the ceremony in the churchyard, Judge Carr found Webb. He looked at Finn, whom Webb was holding. Finn conducted the full assessment. Carr allowed it. He looked at Webb over the baby's head. "Your father told you to stop for people on the road," he said. "He did," Webb said. "Good advice," Carr said. "Turns out to have been excellent advice." He retrieved his hat from Finn's reach and went to find his wife. May Hollis appeared next. She looked at Tess and then at Webb and then at Finn and said, "I knew in November when he found the flower on the first try." Tess looked at her. "I moved the flower on the second day," Tess said. "I know," May said. "He went straight to it. I was watching from across the street." She went to speak to the Reverend. Webb looked at Tess. "She was watching from across the street," he said. "Apparently," Tess said. "Is that?" "Yes," he said. "That is entirely consistent with May Hollis." Tess laughed. He heard the full weight of it. The real one, not the managed version she'd been using for 5 months, and he held Finn a little tighter and thought about a broken handcart in a blizzard and a woman who had asked not to be rescued, but to be taught, and a small iron hammer that was going to need a permanent spot now that it had somewhere to go. He walked across the churchyard to his wife and son. Finn approved of the direction. The forge ran better with 3 people. Tess took over the accounts with the precision that had alarmed her when she first found them, and rebuilt them into a system so orderly that the Copperfield Mines Purchasing Office eventually asked her to explain it, because the Holcomb Forge invoices had become the most accurately itemized documents in their ledger. She told the purchasing agent that imprecise orders were imprecise spending. He wrote it down. Finn walked properly by October. He went to the forge at every available opportunity and had views about the tools that he communicated in the confident, emphatic pre-language of a child who is certain he is being understood and sees no reason why the world should not confirm it. Webb had a theory about this. "He's trying to figure out what everything is for," he told Tess one evening. "He started with his hands," Tess said, "then the floor, then the tools. By spring," Webb said, "he'll have opinions about the anvil." "He already has opinions about the anvil," Tess said. "He told me this morning." On an evening in the 2nd November, with Finn asleep and the fire going and the Colorado dark enormous outside, Tess was at the kitchen table with the accounts, and Webb was reading in the chair by the fire, and he had not turned a page in 15 minutes. She watched him. He looked up. What? Nothing, she said. She went back to the accounts. Then Webb. He set the book down. Yes. She looked at the table. She looked at the small iron hammer on its shelf, where the walnut handle caught the firelight the way it always did in the evenings. She looked at him. If it's a boy, she said, I thought we might call him Patrick. He went very still. He looked at her with the direct, unhurried eyes that had been consistent since a road in November. Something arrived in his face, not surprise, something that had been possible for a while and had just now become real. Patrick, he said. Not because Finn will lose anything, she said, because the name belongs in this house. Patrick Kimball was a good man who deserved more years than he got, and naming his grandson after him is the most honest thing I know how to do. Webb held her gaze for a long moment. Yes, he said, it is. She went back to the accounts. He picked up his book. The fire was warm, and outside the Colorado November was cold and enormous, and the house was exactly the right size, and the name Patrick was in the room with them. Not as absence now, but as continuation. The right use of a good name. Webb Holcomb had once believed the small iron hammer on the shelf was proof of everything the house had lost. That winter, when Finn pulled himself to standing at the fireplace, hearth, and reached up and gripped the walnut handle with the focused, joyful ambition of a child who has found the exact thing he's been looking for, Webb understood that it had also been waiting. That is the whole of it. A man who stopped because his father had told him to stop for people on the road, and who had stopped enough times that it was simply the shape of him. A woman who asked not to be rescued but to be taught, who carried more grief than she had let herself feel until she was somewhere safe enough to feel it, and who said yes to staying the same way she said everything that mattered. Simply, without decoration, trusting it to be enough. A baby who assessed every new face with the serious attention of someone for whom every arrival was equally significant, and who reached his conclusions without apology. Some winters arrive to close the world down. Some arrive to make the immediate matter more. Before I go, I want to say something directly to you. Every one of you who listens to these stories does so because you need something quieter than the world is offering today. You need a voice that tells you people can be decent, and that decency, practiced long enough, stops being something you have to think about and becomes simply the shape of you. Webb Holcomb stopped on that road, not because he was brave, not because he felt anything particular that morning. He stopped because his father had told him to, years before, and he had done it enough times that it had become his nature. That is what these stories are for. Thank you for riding this road with me all the way to the last word. It means more than I can say. May God bless each and every one of you who stayed until the end. May the road ahead be warmer than the one that brought you here. Until next time, keep riding.